Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
I own a big chunk of land on this little mountain, but it's not all mine. The road is the key to everything. It's an old road really, more like a long winding driveway that I've kept up myself for years. It runs right up the side of the mountain and ends at my property, which sits on a nice flat section with an incredible view. For a long time it was just me and the deer and the coyotes. It was peaceful, quiet, a real escape. Then a few years ago, a developer showed up. His name was Mark. He had this fancy suit and a shiny white truck, and he drove up my road like he owned the place. He got out, and I just watched him for a second from my porch. He walked to the edge of the flat part of my land, stared out at the valley, and a huge grin spread across his face. He looked like he'd just found a winning lottery ticket. He told me he wanted to build a large subdivision on the other side of my property, a big development with like 60 new homes. He said it would be exclusive and gated. I just nodded. The problem for him was getting his heavy equipment and all the construction trucks up there. The terrain was rough, rocky, and a real pain to deal with. He could have built his own road, sure, but it would have meant blasting a path through solid rock for about a mile. He would have been spending millions just to get started. So he came to me with an offer. He wanted to use my road as the main access for his project. We went back and forth for weeks. My lawyer, a smart guy named Walter, told me to hold all the cards. We knew Mark was in a tough spot, and that I could basically name my price. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about what my peace and quiet was worth. I told him I'd consider it, but there were going to be some serious restrictions. We finally cut a deal, and it was a complicated one. He paid me a huge amount of money up front, enough that I could have retired twice over. But the main part of the agreement was a set of clauses that protected me and my land. The most important one said that if the developer or, later, the Homeowners Association they planned to create caused any kind of damage to my land, or if they tried to mess with me in any way, the access to the road could be revoked. My lawyer made sure it was written in a way that was airtight. If they even scratched my fence, I could shut them down. I also included a clause that required them to widen the road at certain spots and put in new gravel every year on their dime to handle all the extra traffic. He agreed to everything, all smiles. I signed the papers, and the next week, the whole thing started. It was like a swarm of angry bees had descended on my mountain. The first thing that came up was a massive bulldozer. It was loud, really loud, and dusty. The dust coated everything, including my trucks and my house. Then came the dump trucks, a constant parade of them, all day long. They tore up the road and a few of my older trees on the side. Every time something happened, I took a picture and sent it to my lawyer, who sent a formal notice to Mark. Mark would call me, all apologetic, saying, "Hey man, it's just the cost of progress," and I'd just tell him to read the contract again. The calls stopped pretty quick after that. Mark built those houses faster than I could have imagined. They were all the same, big, square, and boring. They looked like they were copied and pasted all over the mountainside. I guess that's what rich people want. No character, just a big house and a view. As the first one started to go up, I noticed a few of the new owners coming up the road in their expensive cars. They'd stare at my place as they drove by, like I was some kind of weird animal they'd spotted in the wild. The day the first family moved in, Mark came by with a bottle of champagne. He was all buddy-buddy. "Just wanted to say thanks, man. Couldn't have done it without you." He looked out at his brand new houses, a few of them already with fancy-looking cars in the driveways. "You're going to love having neighbors. It's going to be a real community." I just looked at him, and then back at the giant mud pits where my trees used to be. I didn't say anything. He left the champagne on my porch, and I never saw him again. A week later, a different guy showed up. He was shorter, maybe my age, but looked like he hadn't seen the sun in years. He had slicked back gray hair and a serious, pinched look on his face. He introduced himself as the interim president of the new Homeowners Association, a group called the Summit Ridge Residents. He said his name was Arthur, and he came bearing a thick binder full of rules and regulations. He handed it to me with a little smirk. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said. The developer and the first homeowners agreed to a set of rules to keep our community beautiful and consistent. "Since you use the road, you are automatically a part of this organization." I stared at the binder for a minute. My road, my land, and now I had to follow their rules. I was not a part of anything. I told him I had no interest and that I had a private agreement with the developer that had nothing to do with them. He just smiled, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That may be true," he said, "but your use of the road falls under our jurisdiction now. And if you don't follow the rules, there will be consequences." With that, he turned and got in his car, which was far too clean for a dirt road. I watched him drive away, a weird feeling in my gut. This wasn't just a neighborly dispute. This was going to be a fight, and for some reason he seemed to be looking forward to it. I stared at the binder Arthur had given me. The cover said Summit Ridge Residents Association, Rules and Covenants. My old dog, Buster, came over and nudged my hand, sniffing at the cheap paper. I threw the binder on my kitchen table and walked away. There was no way I was going to read that thing, let alone follow any of its rules. My road, my property, my rules. That was the whole point of my deal with Mark. A couple of weeks went by, and I almost forgot about Arthur and his little binder. The trucks kept rumbling by, and the dust was still a problem, but I was busy with my own stuff. I was in the middle of a big project in my workshop, a '67 Mustang that I was trying to get running again. It was a beautiful thing, and I had it sitting out in the yard, its rusted body waiting for me to finish the engine so I could work on the frame. It was a mess, sure, but it was my mess. Then the letter came. It was in a thick envelope, formal and important looking. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the HOA's logo at the top. It said, "Violation Notice" in bold red letters. I felt my stomach tighten as I read it. The letter said that my property was in violation of 3 different rules. The first was for having non-operational vehicles and debris visible from the road. The second was for unapproved landscaping, which apparently meant my trees and shrubs were too wild. The third was for non-uniform fencing, which was a weird one because I didn't even have a fence in the front. It said I had 10 days to fix the issues or face fines and possible removal of the offending items. It was signed by Arthur. I crumpled the paper in my hand and walked out to my front porch. I stood there for a minute just looking at the road and the houses that lined it. They were all so clean and perfect, with manicured lawns and identical flower beds. They looked like they belonged in a magazine, not on a dusty old mountain. I looked at my place, with the tall grouse and the big old trees, and the rusty Mustang sitting there like a monument to a better time. To them, it was an eyesore. To me, it was home. I decided to call Arthur. It was a bad idea, but I was so mad I couldn't help myself. I found his number on the violation letter and dialed it. He picked up on the second ring, sounding way too cheerful. "Arthur Stone speaking," he said. "This is Desmond," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I got your letter." "Ah, Mr. Ward," he said, his voice dropping a little, a hint of a sneer in it now. "I was hoping you'd call. So you've read the rules then? The fines are pretty steep, you know." "I haven't read anything," I said. "And I'm not paying a fine for anything. This is my property and those are my cars. I have a private agreement with the developer. You have no say in what I do here." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "That's where you're mistaken, Mr. Ward. The agreement you have with Mark is personal. The bylaws of this association are binding for all residents who use the road. You signed a legal document with Mark that gave him a right-of-way, and that right-of-way, in turn, is governed by us. We are the ones who manage the road now, and that means we manage everyone who uses it. You don't get it," I said, my voice getting louder. "The deal with Mark had clauses specifically about this. If you or the HOA cause me any kind of problem, I can revoke your access to the road." "You think I'm kidding? My lawyer wrote it himself." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I thought I had him. Then he spoke, and his voice was cold. "You are bluffing. We have our own legal team, Mr. Ward. They looked at the documents and they found nothing that says you can just close the road. This is a public utility, a necessity for 100 homes. It's not public," I said. "It's my private road, and it's not a necessity if you don't use it. You mess with me, you lose it. It's that simple." He let out a sigh, like he was talking to a little kid. "Look, Mr. Ward, let's not make this difficult. We'll send a crew up there to get those rusty hunks of metal out of your yard for you, free of charge. And you can pay the fine, or we can add it to your lien. It's up to you." The call ended. I just stood there, holding my phone. He wasn't joking. They were going to try to take my cars, my hobby, my passion. It felt like a personal attack. I walked back into the house and picked up the violation letter. I read it again, a knot forming in my stomach. The fine was $300, and it would double every week I didn't comply. A picture of my Mustang was attached. They had taken a picture of my home from the road. I called Walter, my lawyer. He was on vacation, but his assistant patched me through. I told him what was happening, my voice tight with anger. He listened for a while, just saying and "I see." When I finished, he was quiet for a second. "Desmond," he finally said, his voice calm, "don't do anything just yet. That clause we put in the contract, the one about damage and access being revoked, we're going to use it. But we have to let them make the first move. They have to cause the damage. Right now, all they've done is send a letter. It's a threat, but it's not the real thing. Let's see what they do. I hung up the phone and walked back out to the porch. A couple of their cars drove by, slowing down as they passed my house, the drivers staring. They probably thought they had me beat. I went back inside and grabbed my camera. I took pictures of my Mustang, the other old trucks I had on my property, every single angle. I wanted proof of everything, just in case. I did a quick search on my phone for towing companies in the area. Nothing came up. I looked at the letter one more time. I had 10 days. I put the camera and the phone away and sat down, my mind racing. A cold dread was creeping up on me, but mixed with it was a strange sense of calm. I knew what was coming. I just didn't know exactly when. I spent the next week just waiting. Every time a car came up the road, I went to the window, half expecting a tow truck to be following behind it. Nothing happened. The 10-day deadline came and went. I was starting to think maybe Arthur was just trying to scare me. Maybe his little HOA had no real power. I even started working on the Mustang again, feeling a little bit of that old peace return. Then the call came from my boss. He needed me to fly out of town for a business trip, a meeting that had been planned for weeks. I couldn't get out of it. It would mean leaving for 4 days. 4 days with no one here to watch the place. It felt like walking into a trap, but I had no choice. I had a life to live, and I couldn't just sit on my porch waiting for those people to make a move. I came home late on a Thursday night. The mountain was dark and quiet. I pulled my truck into the driveway, got out, and turned on the floodlights. The light hit the front of the house, and I saw the empty space. My heart stopped. The Mustang was gone. So were the '71 Chevy pickup and the old Ford F-100 I was going to get to eventually. There was nothing there. The dirt where they'd been was all churned up, and I could see deep tire tracks from a heavy vehicle, probably a tow truck. They did it. They actually did it. My hands were shaking as I walked around my yard. I found a note taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, of course. It said they had safely removed the items in compliance with the violation notice, and that my vehicles were now in a secure lot. It gave an address and a phone number, and said that daily storage fees were being applied, starting today. It also said that the fines for the violation would be sent in a separate invoice, and that they were now going to increase weekly. I stood there, looking at that note, and a cold rage started to build inside me, a kind of anger I hadn't felt in a long, long time. They had come onto my land. They had stolen my property. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number on the note. A woman with a flat, uninterested voice answered. I asked her where my cars were, and she told me they were at a storage lot on the other side of the city. I asked her how much it would cost to get them out. She just gave me the total for the one night of storage plus a towing fee for each vehicle. And it was a ridiculous amount, a couple $1,000s already. I knew then that they had contracted with a company a long way away just to make it a bigger pain for me to get my things back. I hung up and paced my living room. I needed to do something. I had to. It wasn't just about the cars anymore. It was about them thinking they could just walk all over me, that they could come onto my property and take what was mine. I found Arthur's number and called him. He picked up on the first ring, like he was waiting for it. "Arthur Stone," he said, his voice as smooth as butter. "They're gone," I said, my voice low and tight. "My vehicles are gone." He let out a little sigh, a fake sigh of sympathy. "Mr. Ward, I'm sorry you feel that way. We sent you a formal notice. We gave you more than 10 days to comply. We even offered to remove them for you at no charge to avoid the problem. You chose not to act. The association had to step in. You came onto my land and took my things," I said. "That is trespassing. That is theft." "That's where you're mistaken," he said, his voice hard now. "We have a legal right-of-way on your property as outlined in the developer's original agreement. That agreement is now governed by us, and our bylaws allow for the removal of any unsightly property or violations. It was all legal and above board, Mr. Ward. You really should have read that binder I gave you." "There was a clause," I said, my voice shaking now, "a clause that said if you or the developer caused any damage, I could revoke access to the road. Do you know what that means, Arthur? You're done." He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that felt like a slap in the face. "You're talking about a dusty old agreement from years ago, a document that has been superseded by the bylaws of this association. We had our legal team look at everything, Mr. Ward. We found nothing. You have no legal standing to close that road. It's a necessity for over 100 homes, and the county would never allow it. Your threats are empty, just like your backyard." I wanted to scream, but I just took a deep breath. "You think so?" I said, my voice quiet now, cold and steady. "We'll see about that, Arthur. You crossed a line. You didn't just send a letter. You came onto my land. You laid hands on my property. "That was your mistake." He went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sure you'll come to your senses. Give us a call when you're ready to pay the fees and join the association. We can always work something out." He hung up. I stood there for a long time holding the phone. My anger was gone, replaced by a clear, focused determination. I called Walter, my lawyer. He answered immediately. I told him what happened. I could hear him typing on his keyboard. "He's an idiot," Walter said after a minute. "They're all idiots. The agreement is airtight. The developer's right-of-way is only valid as long as they don't cause a problem. And coming onto your land and taking your property is most certainly a problem. What do we do?" I asked. "You call the police and file a theft report," Walter said. "And I'll send them the most carefully worded letter they've ever seen. We'll give them 48 hours to return your vehicles to your property undamaged. After that, we'll file a massive lawsuit. And while we wait for their response, you're going to do one more thing for me. Something that proves to them that we're serious. You're going to call that construction company you've been working with and have them come up there in the morning. I'm going to have the blueprints sent over to you right now. Get them to build that gate." The next morning, I called the police like Walter told me to. The guy on the other end of the line was friendly enough, but he sounded like he was half asleep. I explained that an organization had come onto my private property while I was away and had taken my vehicles. He asked me if I had a receipt for the towing. I told him no, that they were stolen. He asked if there was a note, and I said yes, that there was a note from the HOA. He told me it sounded like a civil matter, not a police issue, and that I should probably talk to a lawyer. I just hung up. It was exactly what I expected, but it still made me so mad I wanted to put my fist through the wall. Just after lunch, the construction crew showed up. They were from the company I had been working with on a few of my own projects, so they knew my place. They came with 2 big flatbed trucks and a smaller excavator. The foreman, a guy named Rick, walked over and shook my hand. "Walter sent over the blueprints," he said, holding up a rolled-up set of plans. "He said you want us to build a gate, a big one, the biggest you've ever seen," I told him. "And I want it to be right at the property line, at the bottom of the road where the dirt starts." Rick just grinned and nodded. "We can do that." They got to work right away. The sound of the excavator was music to my ears. They started digging out the holes for the main posts, 2 huge steel beams that had to be put in a good 4 feet of concrete to hold. They were the size of telephone poles, and they were going to be on either side of the road just before my property line began. As they worked, some of the homeowners from the subdivision started driving by. They would slow down and stare, some of them even pointing. One guy in a shiny black SUV stopped and rolled down his window. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice full of phony concern. "Is this a new security feature for the community?" I didn't even look at him. I just kept watching Rick's guys work. The guy just shrugged and drove off. By the end of the day, the steel posts were set, and the gate itself was being welded together, a massive frame of steel that was a solid 10 feet high and wide enough to cover the whole road. It was a beautiful, ugly thing. The plan was to have it hung on hinges the next morning and then have a giant chain and padlock on it. Just as the sun was going down, a big group of cars pulled up. It was Arthur and the entire HOA board. Arthur was in his car and he had a pinched look on his face. He got out of his car and marched right up to me, with a few of the other board members trailing behind him. "What do you think you're doing, Mr. Ward?" he said, his voice high and thin with anger. "This is outrageous. You're trying to block access to our homes. This is a public road." "It's not a public road," I said, pointing to the property line. "This is my land. The agreement with the developer was for a right-of-way. You violated that agreement when you came on my land and stole my property. The access is now revoked. We didn't steal anything," a woman with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob said, her hands on her hips. "We legally removed it. We're the governing body of this community." "No, you're not," I said. "You're a homeowners association, and you just messed with the wrong homeowner." Arthur stepped forward. He was breathing hard, his face red. "This is not over, Mr. Ward. You can't just do this. We will get a court order. The county will shut you down. You'll be liable for damages for every single homeowner who can't get to their home. Do you have any idea how much money that's going to cost you?" "I think my lawyer does," I said calmly. "And I think my lawyer is a lot better than yours because my lawyer knew to put a clause in the original contract that protected me from exactly this kind of nonsense." Arthur just stared at me for a long time, his eyes full of pure hatred. "You think you've won," he said, his voice so low that it was almost a whisper. "But you're a fool. You're an idiot who thinks he can stop progress with a rusty gate. We have money. We have power. We have the law on our side." "I have a gate," I said. "And I have the law on my side too." He turned and walked away. The other board members looked at me with a mix of fear and anger before they followed him back to their cars. As they were all getting in, Arthur got out of his car one more time and walked to the gate, staring at the plans that were taped to a board. He grabbed his phone and took a picture. "Don't worry," he said without turning around. "We're not going to file a lawsuit." I just stood there, my eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean?" He looked at me over his shoulder, a small, cruel smile on his face. "I mean we're going to put a lien on your property. For the fines, for the storage of your vehicles, for the landscaping violation, for the fence, for everything. We're going to bankrupt you. And when you're done, we're going to take this land, and we're going to build our own gate right here. And you will be living in a tent on the streets with no money, no property and no road." With that, he turned and got back in his car, and they all drove away, leaving me there with the massive half-finished gate. I had never felt more alone or more determined in my life. I stood there for a long time after Arthur and his little posse drove away, the night air getting cold around me. The massive steel gate frame stood like a silent guard, a promise of a future they wouldn't like. My mind replayed his words. "We're going to put a lien on your property. We're going to bankrupt you. And we're going to take this land." A cold dread settled in my stomach, but it didn't last long. It was replaced by the same cold, quiet anger I felt when I discovered my cars were gone. I went inside and got on the phone. Walter's voice was calm when he answered. "He's bluffing," he said after I told him what Arthur had said. "A lien has to be based on a legitimate debt. They have no legal basis for their fines or for the towing. The moment we file our lawsuit, their claims will fall apart. We've got them, Desmond." "He sounded so sure," I said. "He said their lawyers looked at the documents and that I had no legal right." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Well, they looked at the wrong documents," Walter said. "The HOA was formed after the development was completed. They only have a copy of the developer's deed for the properties in their community and the public right-of-way easement for their access. They don't have our private agreement with Mark, the one that was never filed with the county." A light bulb went on in my head. I had forgotten all about it. The day we signed the main contract, Mark and I signed a second, much shorter document. It was a separate agreement just between us that stated that the road was not a public right-of-way. It was a personal revocable license to use my road for his construction and for the new homeowners. It stated that this license was immediately terminated upon any breach of the main contract. I ran to my office and pulled the file. There it was, the second contract, sitting right on top. It was signed and dated with both our signatures witnessed by Walter himself. It was a secret weapon, something their lawyers never knew existed because it was never part of the public record. "Walter," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I've got it. I'm looking at it right now, the separate agreement. It says the license is immediately terminated if the contract is breached." Walter laughed. A real, genuine laugh. "I was hoping you'd find that. Mark and I drew that up just in case. We filed a copy with the main contract, but the county recorder didn't see the need to publicly record a private agreement between two individuals. That's why their lawyers never saw it. They assumed it was a standard easement. The next day, the gate was finished. The hinges were put on, and a big, heavy padlock and chain were put through the handles. I stood there, looking at it. It was like a giant tombstone for their plans. Not an hour later, 2 cars came rumbling up the road. It was Arthur and the blonde-haired board member whose name was Eleanor. They got out of their cars and stormed over to me, their faces red with fury. "We have a court order," Arthur shouted, holding up a piece of paper. "You have to take this down immediately." I just looked at the paper. It was just a petition to file a lawsuit, not a court order. "That's not going to do you any good, Arthur," I said. "You're going to want to see this." I walked back to my truck and pulled out the second contract, the one with Mark's signature. I handed it to him. Arthur took it, his face twisted in a sneer. "What is this, some kind of joke?" he said. He read the first paragraph, and his face went white. He handed it to Eleanor, who read it and then looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "This can't be real," she said, her voice a whisper. "This isn't in the county records. It's real," I said, my voice as calm and steady as I could make it. "It's a private signed agreement that says you, the HOA, and Mark's company have a license to use my road, and that license is revoked. You trespassed on my property and stole my vehicles. That's a crime, and now you have no legal basis to do any of it. Your lawyer messed up, Arthur." They looked in the wrong place. Arthur was speechless. His face was a mix of pure shock and disbelief. He looked at the gate, then back at me. "You can't do this," he finally said, his voice cracking. "We have homes up there, we have families, we need to get in and out. You should have thought of that before you decided to mess with me," I said. "You have 48 hours to get my vehicles back to my property spotless, and pay for all damages. And I want an apology in writing from every board member. If you don't, I'm not just going to sue you. I'm going to own every one of those homes you live in, and I will be building my own development up there." He stood there for a long time, staring at the gate. Finally, he just shook his head and got back in his car. Eleanor looked at me one last time, a look of pure loathing on her face, and followed him. A week later, my vehicles were returned to my property, cleaned and running better than they had been. They also sent a certified letter with a signed apology and a check for more than the cost of the tow and the storage fees. The gate remained locked. They had to pay a construction company to put in a new road, and a few of the homeowners got so mad about it that they started a civil lawsuit against the HOA. Arthur and his board were left to deal with it, a community of people who were now completely stranded and fighting with each other. I just watched it all from my porch with a cup of coffee in my hand and a quiet sense of satisfaction. I finally had my peace back. My road was my road again.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share.